Is there a problem?
Sir, this ticket is invalid.
Check the card.
Oh, Platinum, I'm so sorry.
What happens when a simple trip turns into a public spectacle of prejudice? We're about to meet Dr. Marcus Thorne, a world-class surgeon dressed for comfort holding a first-class ticket. But to the airline staff, he was just a black man who looked like he didn't belong. They mocked him, questioned his ticket, and tried to humiliate him in front of a packed departure lounge. They thought they held all the power, until he pulled out a single, sleek black card that changed everything. But the story doesn't end there. The universe has a funny way of balancing the scales, and the karma that came for one gate agent was so direct, so unbelievably perfect, it could only be real life. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 carried its usual chaotic symphony, the frantic clicking of rolling luggage, the distant garbled announcements of gate changes, and the low hum of 1,000 private conversations. For Dr. Marcus Thorne, it was all just white noise, a barrier between him and the destination he so desperately needed to reach. He was tired. Not just the regular end of the work week tired, but a deep, bone-deep exhaustion that settled in the marrow. Just 10 hours earlier, he had been standing under the brilliant, sterile lights of an operating theatre at Johns Hopkins Hospital. For 7 of those hours, his world had been reduced to the microscopic landscape of the human brain. He and his team were performing a revolutionary new procedure to resect a particularly aggressive glioblastoma, a tendrilled monster of a tumor wrapped around a patient's motor cortex. The surgery was a success, a delicate dance of neuroscience and scalpel that left him mentally drained but professionally exhilarated. It was this very procedure he was scheduled to present in 3 days at the World Health Symposium in Geneva, Switzerland. This trip wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. It was the culmination of 3 years of relentless research. But looking at himself in the reflection of a darkened screen, he knew he didn't look like a pioneering neurosurgeon. He looked like a man who had been through a ringer. He wore a simple charcoal grey fleece hoodie over a plain black t-shirt. His sweatpants were a matching grey, chosen for the sole purpose of surviving a 7-hour flight in some semblance of comfort. On his feet were a pair of well-worn sneakers, a simple backpack containing his laptop with the presentation, and a change of clothes was slung over one shoulder. He hadn't had time to go home to change into the crisp suit and leather shoes that hung waiting in his closet. He had driven straight from the hospital to the airport, the phantom pressure of his surgical loops still a ghost on the bridge of his nose. He navigated the check-in and security process with the practiced ease of a frequent flyer. The first-class check-in agent had been perfectly polite, if a little surprised, but his ticket was valid, and his bags were checked without issue. Security was the usual impersonal shuffle. Now all that was left was the wait. His flight, Aurafly 112 to Geneva, was scheduled to board in an hour. He bypassed the gleaming entrance to the Aurafly Polaris lounge. Normally he would have gone in, grabbed a quiet corner, and sipped a club soda while reviewing his notes. But today, the thought of polite conversation and forced ambiance was too much. He just wanted anonymity. He found a seat at the far end of the boarding area for gate B28, near a window overlooking the sprawling tarmac, where dusk was beginning to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through post-op reports from his resident Dr. Evans. Everything was stable. The patient was waking up responsive. He allowed himself a small, private smile. This is why he did it. The exhaustion, the stress, the endless hours, it was all worth it for that one outcome. As the boarding time approached, the area around gate B28 began to swell with passengers. Marcus watched them, a detached observer. There were businessmen in tailored suits, their voices crisp and important. There were families corralling excited children. There were couples speaking in soft, romantic French, likely heading home. He felt a pang of loneliness, a familiar companion on these solo work trips. Now boarding Aurafly Flight 112 to Geneva, a sharp, amplified voice announced. We would now like to invite our Global Services members, active duty military in uniform, and families traveling with small children to begin pre-boarding. A small trickle of people made their way forward. Marcus waited. He wasn't in a hurry. His seat 2A wasn't going anywhere. We now invite our first class and Polaris business class passengers to board. Please have your boarding pass and passport ready. This was his cue. He stood up, stretching his stiff back, and joined the much shorter line forming in the priority lane. The weight of his backpack felt heavier now, the exhaustion pressing down. All he could think about was reclining his seat, putting on his noise-cancelling headphones, and sleeping until the gentle chime of the seatbelt sign over the Swiss Alps. He was so close. He had no idea he was about to walk into a storm. At the head of the boarding lane stood 2 gate agents in crisp navy blue Aurafly uniforms. The woman at the primary podium was the one who had made the announcements. She had a severe blonde bob, sharp features, and a name tag that read Karen. Her lips were pursed into a thin, permanent line of dissatisfaction, as if the world consistently failed to meet her standards. Beside her, a younger male agent, Kevin, leaned against the counter, a smirk playing on his face as he watched the passengers. The line moved quickly. A family in front of Marcus was processed with practiced efficiency. Then it was his turn. He stepped forward and handed his passport and phone, displaying the digital boarding pass, to the agent named Karen. She took the passport, but barely glanced at his phone. Instead, her eyes did a slow, deliberate sweep of his attire from his hoodie down to his sneakers. It was a dismissive, judgmental appraisal that was impossible to misinterpret. Her thin lips tightened further. "Sir," she began, her voice dripping with a cloying, false sweetness. "The economy boarding call hasn't been made yet. You'll need to step aside and wait." Marcus blinked, momentarily confused. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice calm and even. "I believe you'll find this is the first-class line. My seat is 2A. He gestured towards his phone, still in her hand. Kevin, the other agent, snickered softly. Karen didn't look at the phone. She kept her gaze fixed on Marcus, a flicker of something ugly disdain, perhaps even amusement in her eyes. "I'm sure that's what it says, sir. But mistakes happen. Sometimes people get in the wrong line. If you'll just wait until your zone is called, we can avoid any confusion." The word confusion was aimed at him, but it was clear she was the one creating it. The implication was as sharp as a slap. "You don't belong here." The few passengers behind him began to shift uncomfortably. A man in a tailored suit sighed with audible impatience. Marcus could feel the heat of dozens of eyes on him. Humiliation began to prickle at the back of his neck, but he pushed it down, replacing it with a cold, controlled patience he had perfected over years in the operating room. Losing his composure was not an option. "There's no mistake," Marcus said, keeping his tone level. "My seat is 2A. If you would please scan the pass, you'll see it's correct." Karen let out a theatrical sigh as if dealing with a troublesome child. She finally picked up the scanner, but instead of scanning his phone, she looked over at Kevin. "Kevin, can you believe this?" "He's insisting." Kevin pushed himself off the counter, folding his arms. "Some people just don't listen, Karen. What's the ticket number? Probably a counterfeit QR code he pulled off the internet." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Counterfeit. The word echoed in Marcus's mind. After a 7-hour brain surgery, after years of dedication, his presence in this line was so unbelievable to them that they jumped to the conclusion of fraud. He wasn't just a tired passenger, He was a potential criminal. "That's a serious allegation," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, the calm now laced with steel. "I can assure you the ticket is real. It was booked by the booking agency for the World Health Symposium." Karen's eyes lit up with malicious glee. She saw an opening. "Oh, the World Health Symposium. Of course. And what are you, the keynote speaker?" She and Kevin shared a laugh. It wasn't a loud laugh, but a quiet, condescending chuckle that was far more insulting. The man in the suit behind Marcus finally spoke up. "For God's sake, just scan his pass. We'd all like to get on the plane." Karen shot him a venomous glare. "Sir, I am responsible for the security and integrity of this boarding process. I will not be rushed." She turned her attention back to Marcus, her voice now hard and official. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the line. I need to verify this ticket, and you're holding everyone up." She was trying to publicly shame him into submission. She wanted him to retreat, embarrassed to the back of the economy line, where she clearly believed he belonged. The blood pounded in Marcus's ears. He could feel the stares of everyone in the gate area. He thought of the presentation waiting on his laptop, of the colleagues and mentors who would be in Geneva, of the patient lying in recovery, whose life depended on the very science he was going to share. And all of it was being jeopardized by this woman's petty prejudice, by her inability to see past his grey sweatpants. He took a slow, deliberate breath, centering himself. He would not be moved. He would not be humiliated. He had one more card to play, a card he rarely used, but one he kept for moments precisely like this. "You don't need to verify the ticket," Marcus said, his voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "But you do need to see this." Marcus's movements were unhurried, a stark contrast to the tense, agitated energy crackling around the boarding podium. He reached into the front pocket of his backpack, the one he kept his wallet in, for easy access. Karen watched him, a smug, triumphant look on her face. She probably expected him to pull out a crumpled, printed itinerary from a third-party booking site, something she could easily dismiss. Kevin stood beside her, arms still crossed, the very picture of bored superiority. His fingers closed around his wallet. He didn't pull it all the way out. Instead, he slipped one card from its dedicated slot. It was heavy, made of anodized metal and matte black. It made no sound as he slid it out. He placed it on the counter between them. The card landed with a soft, definitive thud, a sound of pure density and significance that cut through the low hum of the gate area. On its clean black surface, in stark silver lettering, were the words, "Aurafly Platinum Elite, Global Services." Below it was his name, Dr. Marcus Thorne. For a moment there was complete silence. The card sat there like a black hole, absorbing all the light and arrogance in the room. Karen froze. Her eyes, which had been alight with scorn, were now wide and fixed on the piece of metal. Her brain seemed to stall, unable to compute this new contradictory piece of information. The man in the hoodie and sweatpants, the man she had accused of holding a counterfeit ticket, the man she had tried to banish to the back of the plane, was not just a first-class passenger. He was a member of their most exclusive invitation-only tier. Global Services was a legendary status within Aurafly. It wasn't earned with miles. It was bestowed. It was reserved for the airline's absolute top-spending clients, corporate executives, high-level diplomats, and world shapers. Members had a private 24/7 concierge hotline. They were personally greeted on the tarmac. Rules were not just bent for them, they were rewritten. A gate agent like Karen might see a Global Services member once or twice a year, if ever. To insult one, to publicly accuse one of fraud, it was a career-ending mistake. The color drained from Corin's face, leaving a pasty, sickly pallor. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a wave of raw, unfiltered panic. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. Kevin's smirk had vanished. His jaw was slack, and he took an involuntary step back from the counter, as if the black card might burn him. Marcus didn't say a word. He just stood there, his expression unreadable, and let the silence do the work. He let her stare at the card and connect the dots. He let her feel the full crushing weight of her miscalculation. Finally, she seemed to find her voice, but it was a choked, stuttering whisper. I see. Sir, my apologies. There was a misunderstanding. Was there? Marcus asked, his voice still quiet, but now resonating with an icy power. It seemed very clear to me. You accused me of holding a counterfeit ticket. You and your colleague here were laughing about it. You tried to send me to the back of the line, based on, what exactly, my clothing? No, sir, of course not. She stammered, her hands fluttering nervously. She fumbled for the scanner, her fingers clumsy, and finally scanned his boarding pass. The machine beeped its cheerful green-lit approval. It was valid. Of course it was valid. Please accept my sincerest apologies, Dr. Thorne, she said, reading his name off the card, the title Doctor, now sounding like an accusation against her. Welcome aboard. Please go right ahead. But Marcus didn't move. He looked from her panicked face to Kevin's terrified one. He wasn't finished. This wasn't about getting on the plane anymore. This was about the principal. It's a little late for that, he said calmly. Your misunderstanding was a public performance. You subjected me to suspicion and ridicule in front of all these people. I don't think a quick sorry at the podium is going to suffice. Just then, a man in a slightly sharper, better-fitting suit approached, a concerned look on his face. His name tag read, Robert Henderson, Station Manager. He had likely been alerted by the commotion or the prolonged halt in the boarding process. Is there a problem here? Mr. Henderson asked, his eyes darting between Marcus, the panicked agents, and the card still sitting on the counter. His gaze landed on the card, and his professional smile instantly tightened. He knew exactly what it was. Yes, Robert, I think there is a problem, Marcus said, finally picking up his card and sliding it back into his wallet. Your agents Karen and Kevin have just provided me with some of the most unprofessional and discriminatory service I have ever experienced. I'd like your full name and employee number, and I'd also like the full names and employee numbers for these two. I will be filing a formal complaint with Airline's corporate office and the Department of Transportation. The blood drained from Karen's face completely. A complaint from a regular passenger was one thing. A formal complaint from a Global Services member was a corporate death sentence. Mr. Henderson looked at his two agents, his expression turning from concern to pure fury. He knew without a shadow of a doubt that they were about to bring a world of trouble down on his station. The show was over for Karen and Kevin. The real consequences were just beginning to board. Robert Henderson was a man who understood optics, and the current optics were a full-blown, 5-alarm disaster. A premium, top-tier passenger, a doctor no less, being publicly harassed by his staff at the gate of a flagship international flight. He could already see the internal emails, the furious calls from corporate, the potential for a viral social media post that could tarnish Airline's reputation for months. His response had to be immediate, decisive, and overwhelmingly apologetic. Dr. Thorne, Mr. Henderson began, his voice a smooth balm of practiced corporate contrition. He completely ignored Karen and Kevin, treating them as if they had ceased to exist. On behalf of Airline, I am profoundly sorry for what you have just experienced. This is unacceptable. It is not our standard. It is not what we train for, and I assure you, it will be dealt with immediately and severely. He turned to his disgraced agents. His voice dropped the conciliatory tone and became a low, angry hiss. "You two, in my office. Now, hand over your scanners. You're off the gate." Karen looked like she was about to be sick. Kevin just stared at the floor, his face burning with shame. Wordlessly, they placed their equipment on the counter, and with a final terrified glance at Marcus, scurried away like chastised children. Mr. Henderson assigned another more professional-looking agent to take over the podium and resume boarding. He then turned his full attention back to Marcus. "Sir, please allow me to personally escort you onto the aircraft. I have already informed the purser of the situation. They are waiting for you. We will do everything in our power to make the remainder of your journey as comfortable as possible." Marcus nodded, a grim sense of finality settling over him. He had won the battle, but the victory felt strangely hollow. The adrenaline was fading, and the deep, familiar weariness was returning, now tinged with the bitter aftertaste of prejudice. He followed Mr. Henderson down the jet bridge, the hushed whispers of the other passengers following him. On board, the atmosphere was entirely different. The purser, a kind-faced woman named Isabel, greeted him at the door with a look of deep concern. "Dr. Thorne, welcome. I am so terribly sorry for your experience at the gate. Please let me show you to your seat. Can I get you a glass of champagne or perhaps some water before takeoff?" "Water would be great, thank you, Isabel," Marcus said, managing a small, tired smile. He settled into seat 2A, the plush leather and generous legroom, a world away from the hostility of the terminal. The cabin was quiet, a sanctuary of muted tones and soft lighting. Mr. Henderson lingered for a moment. "Dr. Thorne again, my deepest apologies. My card, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly for anything at all. We will be conducting a full investigation." Marcus took the card. "Thank you, Robert. I appreciate that." As Mr. Henderson departed, Isabel returned with a bottle of Fiji water and a glass with lime. "The captain has also been informed, and he extends his personal apologies as well," she said softly. "He hopes you will allow him to come and speak with you once we're at cruising altitude." "That's not necessary," Marcus said. "It wasn't his fault. It wasn't yours either. You've all been very professional." "It's our collective responsibility, sir," she replied, her sincerity genuine. "Please, if there is anything, a meal from the business class menu, an extra amenity, do not hesitate to ask." She retreated, and for the first time, Marcus was alone with his thoughts. The plane door closed with a satisfying thud, sealing him off from the chaos of the gate. The engines began to whine, and soon the aircraft was pushing back, beginning its slow taxi to the runway. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes. He should have felt vindicated. He had stood up for himself. The agents who had wronged him were facing consequences. The airline was tripping over itself to make amends. Yet he felt a profound sadness. The black card in his wallet had saved him. But what if he hadn't had it? What if he were a school teacher, a software engineer, a musician who had saved up for a year to buy a first-class ticket for a once-in-a-lifetime trip? He would have been dismissed, humiliated, and sent to the back of the line with no recourse. Justice in this case had been a privilege, not a right. It was a perk of his status, a function of his spending power. The thought was deeply unsettling. The prejudice wasn't about his ticket, it was about him. His race combined with his casual attire had created a narrative in Karen's mind. This man does not belong. The platinum card hadn't changed her mind about who he was. It had only changed her mind about how she had to treat him. The root of the problem, the ugly bias that lay beneath the surface, was still there. As the plane thundered down the runway and lifted gracefully into the night sky, leaving the lights of New York behind, Marcus felt a resolve harden within him. A formal complaint wasn't enough. An apology wasn't enough. He owed it to the person he would have been without that card to see this through. He pulled out his laptop. He wasn't going to start on his presentation. He opened a blank document and began to compose a detailed, systematic email. It wasn't addressed to Robert Henderson. It was addressed to James Albright, the Chief Executive Officer of Aurafly. The flight deck of Aurafly 112 was a cocoon of calm. 38,000 feet above the Atlantic, the Airbus A350 sliced through the darkness, its only companions the moon and a sea of stars. In the first-class cabin, the lights were dimmed. Most passengers were asleep, cocooned in their lie-flat beds. But Marcus Thorne was wide awake, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his focused, somber expression. The email he was writing was not a rant. It was precise, clinical, and methodical, much like a surgical report. He detailed the events with dispassionate accuracy, the time, the gate number, the names of the agents, the exact words they used. He recounted the accusation of holding a counterfeit ticket, the snickering, the public dismissal. He described the instantaneous change in their demeanor the moment they saw his global services card. This, he argued, was the crux of the issue. The problem, he wrote, is not that your staff eventually corrected their behavior. The problem is that the behavior existed in the first place. The correction was not born of a realization of their error in judgment regarding a fellow human being, but of their fear of the repercussions of mistreating a high-value customer. My status card acted as a shield, but your company's commitment to dignity and respect should not be a tiered perk. It should be the absolute baseline for every single passenger who walks up to your gate, regardless of their class of travel, their attire, or the color of their skin. He went on to suggest concrete actions, a full review of implicit bias training for all customer-facing staff with a focus on real-world scenarios rather than corporate platitudes. He recommended a blind check-in system trial, where agents only see a name and seat number, not the class of travel, until the final scan to mitigate prejudgment. He didn't ask for compensation, for miles, or for vouchers. He asked for something far more valuable, meaningful, systemic change. He typed for nearly an hour, refining every sentence. When he was done, he read it over one last time, attached his contact information, and hit send. A quiet whoosh from his laptop signaled it was gone, sent into the ether, an electronic message in a bottle aimed at the very top of the corporate food chain. He closed the laptop and tried to sleep, but his mind was turbulent. The incident had dredged up a lifetime of similar, smaller moments, the microaggressions that were not so micro, being followed in a high-end store, being asked if he was in the right place at a medical conference mixer, the surprise on people's faces when he was introduced as Dr. Thorne. Each one was a small cut, but they added up, leaving behind a network of fine scars on the soul. He had built his life as a fortress against such prejudice. His education, his title, his professional success, even his expensive exclusive membership card, they were all in part layers of armor. He had naively hoped that he had reached a level of achievement where he would no longer have to face such blatant disrespect. Today had proven him wrong. The armor was useless if someone refused to see the person inside it. His thoughts drifted to Karen. What kind of life led a person to be so miserable, so eager to wield a tiny sliver of power to belittle another human being? Was she a product of her environment? Was she simply having a bad day and chose him as an outlet? Or was there a deeper, more ingrained ugliness there? He found he couldn't summon any hatred for her, only a profound sense of pity and disappointment. Her worldview was a prison, and he had just rattled the bars. He finally drifted into a fitful sleep. The drone of the engines, a lullaby, and dreamt of complex surgical diagrams and the condescending smirk of a gate agent, the two images blurring together in the strange logic of his subconscious. He woke to the gentle morning light filtering through the cabin window. Below, the snow-capped peaks of the Swiss Alps glowed in the dawn. The raw beauty of it was a balm. Isabel was there instantly, offering coffee and a warm croissant. The rest of the flight passed in a haze of quiet professionalism. Upon landing in Geneva, he was the first off the plane. A dedicated Aurafly representative was waiting for him at the jet bridge, holding a sign with his name. "Dr. Thorne, I'm Jean-Pierre. I'm here to personally escort you through immigration and to your luggage. We have a car waiting to take you to your hotel." The gesture was appreciated, but felt like more of the same, a frantic effort to placate the Platinum member, not to address the root cause. He accepted graciously, and within 30 minutes, he was in the back of a black Mercedes, gliding along the shores of Lake Geneva. The indignity at JFK felt a world away, yet it lingered like a phantom limb. The conference was a resounding success. His presentation was met with a standing ovation. His technique was hailed as a potential breakthrough in neuro-oncology. He met with colleagues engaged in brilliant debates and felt the pure intellectual joy of his profession. But in quiet moments he would check his email. 3 days after he sent his message, a reply appeared. It was not from a customer service representative. It was from the office of James Albright, CEO of Aurafly. It was a lengthy, personal, and deeply apologetic email. Albright assured him an investigation was already concluded, that the agents involved were no longer with the company, and that his suggestions for new training protocols were being fast-tracked to the executive board. "Dr. Thorne, you were right to call us out," Albright wrote. "Your status should never have been the reason you were treated with respect. Thank you for holding us to a higher standard." It was more than he had expected. A small seed of hope was planted. Perhaps, just perhaps, his hollow victory could lead to a real one. He closed his laptop and looked out at the tranquil beauty of Geneva. For now it was enough. He had no idea that hundreds of miles away, the universe was already busy writing the final karmic chapter of the story for him. For Karen Miller, the end of her career didn't arrive with a gradual descent. It was a catastrophic failure at cruising altitude. The summons to station manager Robert Henderson's office was immediate. She and Kevin were ushered in, not as colleagues, but as defendants at a pre-trial hearing. Henderson didn't sit behind his desk. He stood by the window overlooking the tarmac. His arms crossed his posture, radiating a cold, controlled fury. "I have already been on the phone with corporate headquarters in Chicago." He began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I have reviewed the gate's audio and video logs, and I have read the preliminary incident report. There is no version of this story where either of you acted in a manner that is anything less than a complete and utter disgrace to your uniform." Karen opened her mouth to speak, to defend, to explain. "But Robert, he was dressed." "I don't care if he was wearing a spacesuit, Karen," Henderson snapped, whirling around to face her. His eyes were like ice chips. "Your job is to scan a valid ticket and welcome a passenger aboard. It is not to be the fashion police. It is not to pass judgment. It is certainly not to make baseless, insulting, and potentially litigious accusations of fraud in a public forum." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "The man you publicly humiliated is not only a member of our most valuable invitation-only client program, but he's also a world-renowned surgeon." The complaint he filed went directly to the CEO's office. "The fallout from this is just beginning, but your part in it is over." He gestured to 2 envelopes on his desk. "Your final paychecks and termination papers. Security will escort you from the premises. Your ID badges are deactivated. You are no longer employees of Aurafly. It was that simple, that brutal. A 15-year career erased in 15 minutes. As she was walked through the terminal, stripped of her credentials and authority, she felt the burning stares of her former colleagues. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot poker pressed against her skin. But beneath the shame, a hard, bitter seed of resentment began to sprout. This wasn't her fault. It was his. Dr. Marcus Thorne. He had set this trap with his unassuming clothes and quiet demeanor, and she had walked right into it. In the warped narrative she was already constructing, she wasn't the aggressor. She was the victim of a world gone too sensitive. The months that followed were a slow, grinding erosion of the life she had known. Her attempts to find work with other airlines were met with polite but firm rejections. The industry was smaller than it seemed, and the story of the JFK Gate incident, though not public, had clearly made the rounds. The power she had once wielded was gone, replaced by the crushing powerlessness of the unemployed. Her husband, David, a man whose gentle nature was a steady ballast in their life, tried his best to be a supportive anchor. "We'll get through this, honey," he'd say. "It's just a job." But it wasn't just a job. It was her status, her identity. The frustration and bitterness curdled inside her, seeping into the foundations of her marriage. Arguments began to erupt over trivial things, an unwashed dish, a late bill, but they were always underneath it all about the monumental failure she refused to accept as her own. "You're just so angry all the time," David said one evening after she had snapped at him for leaving a light on. "Wouldn't you be?" She retorted, her voice sharp. "My entire life was destroyed because some guy in sweatpants got his feelings hurt. The world is upside down, David. Or maybe you just made a terrible mistake, Karen," he said quietly. The simple truth of it, more cutting than any shout. The chasm between them grew wider. After 4 months of fruitless searching, she finally took a job that felt like a penance, a full-time cashier position at a sprawling, soulless big box store. The crisp-tailored Aurafly uniform was replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting polyester vest in a garish shade of red. The boarding podium was replaced by a sticky conveyor belt. Her authority was reduced to asking, "Did you find everything you were looking for today?" in a monotone 1,000 times a day. She felt invisible, a ghost haunting the aisles of her own diminished life. It was during this bleak period that David's health began to decline. It started subtly. He'd be telling a story and suddenly pause, unable to grasp a common word that was right on the tip of his tongue. Then came the headaches, a dull pressure behind his right eye that he blamed on the stress of their finances. One morning, the tremor in his left hand, which he'd dismissed as a pinched nerve, caused him to drop his coffee mug, shattering it across the kitchen floor. Karen's initial reaction was annoyance, another crack in their already fractured existence. But as the symptoms worsened, annoyance was replaced by a cold, creeping dread. This was more than stress. A visit to their family doctor led to an urgent referral to a neurologist, which led to an MRI. They sat in the neurologist's sterile office a week later, the silence thick and heavy. The doctor entered with a somber expression, clipping the black and white images of David's brain onto a light box. Even to Karen's untrained eye, the ghostly white mass blooming in the dark grey matter looked alien and terrifying. "Mr. Miller." The neurologist said, his voice gentle but direct. "The scan shows a significant lesion in your right frontal lobe. Based on its appearance and location, I am sorry to tell you that it is highly characteristic of a glioblastoma." The word was a gunshot in the quiet room. Glioblastoma. Brain cancer. The most aggressive, the most relentless. Karen felt the floor drop out from beneath her. All her petty grievances, the lost job, the bruised ego, the financial worries were instantly incinerated by the white-hot terror of that single word. Nothing else mattered. Her world, which had been unraveling now, simply ceased to exist, replaced by a new, terrifying reality, defined by a monster in her husband's head. The ensuing weeks were a whirlwind of fear and information. The prognosis was grim. The tumor's location, woven into the delicate tissue that controlled the left side of his body, made surgery exceptionally dangerous. A local neurosurgeon gave them the standard bleak assessment. A partial removal was possible, but the risks of permanent paralysis were high, and the tumor would inevitably grow back. Desperate, they sought a second opinion from a leading oncologist in the state. He reviewed David's case with a grave look on his face, but after a long silence, he offered a sliver of hope. Conventional approaches here are limited, the oncologist explained, tapping a pen on David's MRI scan. But there is one surgeon, a man who is doing things no one else thought possible. He's a pioneer in functional brain mapping. He essentially creates a live, personalized GPS of the brain during surgery, allowing him to remove tumors like this with a precision that borders on miraculous. It's aggressive, it's radical, and frankly, it is David's best and only real shot. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through Karen for the first time in weeks. "Who is he? Where is he? We'll go anywhere." The oncologist nodded, looking down at his referral pad as he began to write. "He's arguably the best neuro-oncological surgeon in the world right now. Getting a consultation is like trying to get an audience with the Pope, but for a case this clear-cut, I can get your file in front of him." He finished writing and slid the referral slip across the desk. "He's the chief of neuro-oncology at Johns Hopkins." Karen leaned forward, her heart pounding with a desperate, unfamiliar optimism. She looked down at the name written in crisp black ink on the pad. Dr. Marcus Thorne. The drive to Baltimore was a 4-hour journey through a landscape of suffocating silence. Every mile that passed on the highway felt like a step closer to a gallows Karen had built for herself 7 months prior. She sat in the passenger seat, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were bone-white. She stared out the window at the passing scenery, but saw none of it. Her mind was a frantic, replaying loop of the scene at Gate B28, her own sneering voice, the condescending laugh she had shared with Kevin, the dismissive wave of her hand, and the cold, quiet dignity of the man she had wronged. David beside her mistook her tension for simple fear for his health. He reached over and placed a comforting hand on her knee. "Hey," he said softly, his voice full of a gentle concern that only made her feel worse. "We're going to the best place, seeing the best doctor. Whatever he says, we'll face it together. It's going to be okay." Karen couldn't bring herself to look at him. If he knew the truth, would he still touch her with such kindness? If he knew that her past cruelty was now inextricably linked to his future survival, would he look at her with the same love? A sob caught in her throat, a toxic mix of guilt and terror. She simply nodded, unable to speak, and turned back to the window. She had rehearsed 1,000 apologies in her head, but they all turned to ash in her mouth. How do you apologize to a man for your own rotten soul, and then, in the next breath, ask him to save your husband's life? The Johns Hopkins outpatient center was less a building and more a monument to hope and science. Its sheer scale was overwhelming. As they walked through the automatic doors into the gleaming, expansive lobby, Karen felt utterly insignificant, a sinner crawling to the altar. This was a world of brilliant minds and life-saving technology, a world Dr. Thorne inhabited with ease. A world she had assumed based on a hoodie and a pair of sweatpants that he could never be a part of. The irony was a physical weight pressing down on her chest and making it hard to breathe. They checked in with a polite receptionist who directed them to the neurosciences wing on the 4th floor. The waiting area was filled with the quiet, dignified anxiety common to such places. People of all ages and backgrounds sat in muted silence, their faces etched with worry and hope. Karen and David found 2 empty chairs and the wait began. Each tick of the large clock on the wall was a countdown. Karen found herself scanning the face of every doctor who passed in the hallway, her heart leaping with a sickening jolt each time. Was that him? Is that him? She was a mouse, waiting for the eagle to descend. After what felt like a lifetime, a nurse with a kind face appeared at the doorway. David Miller. Karen felt a jolt of pure adrenaline, as if she'd touched a live wire. She stood on unsteady legs, her purse clutched to her chest like a shield. David took her hand, his own grip firm, despite the tremor she could feel running through it. They followed the nurse down a long, immaculate corridor to consultation room 3. The room was small, professional, and terrifyingly intimate. On one wall hung a series of detailed anatomical diagrams of the human brain, its complex lobes and fissures rendered in clinical detail. Karen stared at one cross-section, showing the very area where David's tumor was nestled like a spider in its web. This was Dr. Thorne's domain. He navigated that landscape for a living. The room felt like his territory, and they were trespassers seeking a pardon. They sat, and the nurse closed the door behind them, leaving them in a silence that was even more profound than the one in the car. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Dr. Marcus Thorne entered, and for a fleeting, merciful second, he didn't look up. He was wearing pristine navy blue scrubs under a crisp white physician's coat. His focus was entirely on the thick, patient file in his hands, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked like what he was, a brilliant, serious man tasked with matters of life and death. "Good morning," he said, his voice the same calm, resonant baritone she remembered with a sickening clarity. "I'm Dr. Thorne. I've been reviewing your case, Mr. Miller, and the imaging is quite clear regarding the tumor's position. The primary challenge will be achieving a full resection without impacting the adjacent motor functions." He reached the desk and, still speaking, finally lifted his head to make eye contact with his patient and his patient's wife. He looked at David first, a kind but professional gaze. Then his eyes moved to Karen. Time stopped. It was not a slow dawn of recognition. It was instantaneous, a circuit closing a spark, jumping a 7-month gap. His words faltered and died in his throat. The professional mask he wore didn't just slip, it shattered. For one unguarded second, she saw it all in his eyes, a flicker of shock, the unmistakable shadow of a painful memory, and a profound, weary disbelief. He remembered. He remembered every single detail. Then, just as quickly as it had shattered, the mask was back, but it was a different mask now. It was harder, more controlled, an impenetrable wall of clinical detachment. His face became an unreadable slate of professionalism, but the temperature in the room had plummeted. The air was thick with their unspoken history, a toxic ghost sitting in the chair between them. David, sensing the sudden inexplicable shift in atmosphere, looked from the doctor's stony face to his wife's ashen one. "Karen, is everything okay? Do you two know each other?" Dr. Thorne chose that moment to reclaim control of the room, his authority absolute. He completely ignored David's question and broke his intense gaze, with Karen turning his body slightly to focus exclusively on his patient. It was a deliberate, surgical exclusion. "Mr. Miller?" He continued, his voice now devoid of its earlier warmth, a tool of pure information. "As I was saying, The procedure is complex. We will use intraoperative MRI and cortical mapping to stimulate the brain and identify the precise boundaries of your motor strip. This allows me to be aggressive with the tumor while creating a margin of safety for your functional tissue. He spoke for 15 minutes, explaining the surgery with a detached brilliance that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. For Karen, every word was a fresh torment. He spoke of care, of precision, of his duty to preserve life and function. He was describing the sacred vow of his profession, a vow that stood in stark, glaring contrast to her own petty cruelty. She hadn't seen a man a doctor, a human being. She had seen a stereotype, a target for her own miserable discontent. Now the man she had dehumanized was explaining with godlike calm how he would hold her husband's life and future in his hands. When he was finished, he folded his hands on the desk. I know this is a lot to take in, but I want to assure you that you are in excellent hands here. My team and I have performed this specific procedure many times. Do you have any questions for me? David, overwhelmed but reassured by the doctor's confidence, asked about recovery times and potential side effects. Dr. Thorne answered each question patiently and thoroughly, his attention never wavering from David. Then, the inevitable moment arrived. David turned to his wife, his face full of concern. "Honey, do you have anything you want to ask the doctor? Anything at all?" This was it. The spotlight was on her. The silence in the room was a living thing, and Dr. Thorne's neutral waiting expression was the most intimidating thing she had ever witnessed. He wasn't going to help her. He wasn't going to acknowledge their past. He was going to make her speak. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The rehearsed apologies, the pleas for forgiveness, they were all gone. All she had was the raw, crushing truth. Her composure, held together by the thinnest of threads, finally snapped. A strangled sound, half sob, half gasp, escaped her lips. The tears she had been fighting for hours finally broke free, streaming down her face in hot, shameful tracks. I, she stammered, her voice cracking unrecognizable to her own ears. She looked at Dr. Thorne, her vision blurred, and the words finally came out a ragged, desperate whisper. "I am so sorry. That day, at the airport, I was wrong. I was horrible. There is no excuse. I am so sorry." David stared at her, his confusion now turning to utter shock. "Airport? What are you talking about?" "Doctor, what is she saying?" he asked, turning to the man at the desk, the only person in the room who seemed to have any control. Dr. Marcus Thorne did not move. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression still perfectly neutral. He watched Karen's complete emotional collapse. He saw the bewildered husband, looking to him for answers. The universe had not just balanced the scales, it had inverted them. At gate B28, he was the powerless man being judged. In consultation room 3, he was the powerful man being petitioned. Her husband's brain was on the charts, but Karen's soul was laid bare on the floor, and the scalpel was now in his hand. Dr. Thorne didn't seek revenge. He didn't refuse the surgery. In the end, he did what he had sworn an oath to do. He saved a life. He performed the grueling 8-hour surgery on David Miller, removing the tumor with the same precision and grace he brought to every aspect of his life. David made a remarkable recovery. The story of Karen Miller isn't just about a woman who was cruel and faced the consequences. It's a powerful real-life lesson that the person you dismiss today might be the one you desperately need tomorrow. It's a reminder that prejudice and judgment build walls, while professionalism, empathy, and grace build bridges, sometimes life-saving ones. The world is smaller and more interconnected than we think. Treat everyone with dignity, not because of who they might be, but because of who you are. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more incredible true stories that make you think. What would you have done in Dr. Thorne's position? Let us know in the comments below.